Good evening, Canby. Welcome to this evening. I lift up the citizens of Ukraine and Russia right now as that continues to unfold in the most horrific way. I lift up our community members that have friends and loved ones in that part of the world as well, that they are able to get in touch with family soon. We ask that you protect them, keep them safe, and give them peace. I ask these things in your name. Amen. Right now, it's our first opportunity for citizen input and community announcements. This is an opportunity for audience members to address the City Council on items not on the agenda. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. Staff and the City Council will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizen input before the meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. If you would like to speak, you can either show up in council chambers, like we have a few people here this evening, or you can call the Deputy City Recorder by 4:30 on the night of our City Council meetings with your name, the topic you'd like to speak on, and your contact information. Once your information is received, you will then send instructions to speak. And please note that the council will be starting, well, some of us are meeting virtually. We'll still continue to have, or starting to have live meetings moving forward. I've got 2 in advance of tonight. Lisa O'Brien was regarding tolling, which we have a presentation on later tonight. So Lisa, I will hold off until we have that. And then the other one that's loaded on a non-agenda item is Jason Padden, who wants to address us regarding the street maintenance fee. We have, like I said, to start the meeting, we have we're gone hybrid. So we've got some here live and we've got some on Zoom. And then our city recorder is actually running everything remotely off-site somewhere in the great Northwest. And so there might be some lag time between announcing speakers and things and getting things set up. So bear with us as we do that. If there's too much lag time, we'll call on somebody to entertain those at home and here in the council chambers by singing or dancing.
I was just saying, entertain.
It won't be me.
Definitely will not be me.
Okay, so is Jason coming on now then?
I believe that Melissa is trying to bring Jason up.
Your Honor, he has not arrived into the Zoom panel area yet.
Well, there was the possibility that might happen, so we'll catch Jason on the back end of the evening then. Okay, next up we have a presentation regarding the ODOT tolling program. That's been a lot of conversation in the last several, months or the past year. So we've asked and invited ODOT personnel to come and address the council and give us an update on that project and what that's going to look like here on 205.
They're doing it virtually.
They are doing it virtually. They are zooming in.
I hope.
Look, you have somebody raising a hand in the comments there. There at the back. I don't know if he's trying to do
Maybe
citizen input or not.
is Mr. Pryor, are you there? No, that's Chris.
Somebody was raising their hand, so I don't know if that was.
Mr. Wellender, how are you, sir?
I can't hear him.
Oh, I think you might be still muted, sir.
He's not muted though. If you look at the screen. Oh wait,
Still muted.
no. I think you're muted.
No, he's not.
Normal life would be
We're not hearing
appreciated.
anybody from the Zoom.
Sure.
Hey,
Yes.
Brian.
Yeah.
We can all hear everything that's happening. Can you not hear any of us?
Nope.
Well, we're not hearing Mr. Wellender right now, and I don't know if you guys have tried to speak at all.
Yes, we all have as well.
Can you hear Mr. Wellender at all?
We can hear Mr. Wellender just fine,
Oh, okay.
and we can hear you guys, but you're kind of, it's like you're not mic'd super close. But we can hear you, but it seems like no one in the room can hear any of us on Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, we're working on
We're working
Okay.
on that right
getting that resolved. Apologies, we're working through this here.
Normal life will be appreciated. This hybrid Zoomy caca needs to go away.
Should be good.
Mr. Wellender, can you try again speaking to us, see if it comes through?
Nope.
No.
Are you texting Melissa?
Sounds like everyone in Zoom land can hear each other, but we can't hear Zoom land.
So
There's another, so
Garrett
so this
Pryor.
gentleman is on, but there's another one, Garrett Pryor.
Yeah,
Garrett Pryor is
trying
running
to get in,
background.
Is in the waiting room, apparently.
yeah. She was unaware of that name as far as this presentation.
Yeah. that was
Oh.
it.
All right, it's time for someone to sing and dance.
Jerry.
Mark, you're up.
I don't think Mark heard that. Or he's ignoring it.
Oh, he's ignoring, I'm
We
sure.
need someone to sing and dance, Mark.
We need somebody to
You're
sing
up.
and dance. Mark,
Do a
go.
little show.
Do the little dance.
He's
Yeah.
Get
he's
down
working
tonight.
on it, but he wasn't going to be here, but I guess he is joining now or something, so. There we go.
Okay, so now we have another Zoomer. He's muted.
We apologize for the technical difficulties. We're working on getting that resolved. For those on Zoom that hopefully can hear us, we're trying to get this resolved. I think you can hear us, but we can't hear you yet. And is Gordon?
He's working on it.
Is Mr. Pryor a part of the ODOT?
Yes, he is.
You might try this one, because this one might be normal.
Well, I'm not looking for the audio one for that one.
Oh, I see.
It's obviously working. Nobody talking over there? No?
Garrett's talking, but not coming through.
Okay, yeah, they're,
There we go.
Mr. Pryor, are you there?
yeah, can you hear us?
I can hear you now. Mr. Wellender, are you there?
Yes, I am. You hear me?
Yes. Thank you, Gordon. All right.
Excellent.
Well, welcome. The floor is yours regarding tolling here in the great I-205 corridor. So,
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Mayor
Pleasure.
Hodson, and it's been good. We've spent the last couple hours together at the R1 Act meeting, so I wanted to make sure I got some more Mayor Hodson time in here tonight, so that lined up well. MJ, do you mind bringing up the presentation? Oh, we do. Excellent, yeah. And I'm joined here by MJ Jackson and Chris Wellender, who you'll hear from Chris here in a minute. I do just want to say that I just share my love for Canby a bit. I'm a Wilsonville resident, and my wife and I, we enjoy taking our kiddo out to Canby and to the rural areas more than I would say maybe up into Portland. So Bee's Bakery, the biscuits that are there are excellent. The farmer's market, the bacon wrapped asparagus is my kid's favorite. And we love your old, the playground there in the town center. Just a real love. And I did my first Oregon rodeo this year at the Canby Rodeo, so enjoyed that. But the topic we're going to talk tonight isn't maybe as fun or enjoyable as bacon wrapped asparagus or delicious biscuits. It's the tolling project. But we're hoping to bring some information to you all tonight about this big change that's coming. And we hope we can, because we're coming early and often, start to lessen some of the fear and figure out what are ways that we can turn this to be a benefit for Canby, and what are those improvements outside of tolling that we need to bring, if need be, into the community onto local streets to help address those impacts. So let's go to the next slide. So we have and MJ, I'm not hearing the audio.
Yeah.
So
Me neither.
you might have to, MJ, you might have to unshare and then reshare your screen. And again, this is the song and dance time if anyone has an intermission break. Oh, perfect.
To improve traffic, the Oregon Department of Transportation is studying proposals for a variable rate toll, also called congestion pricing, on I-5 and I-205 in the Portland region. We've heard questions about what this means for I-205 and local roads. Analysis shows that tolling and investing in I-205 will significantly reduce congestion and improve reliable trip with reduced travel times, and will choose to pay for that predictability. Less congestion can mean fewer hours spent on interstate travel, fewer emissions, and progress in meeting climate goals. With a toll, some drivers will choose to adjust their trip. For example, if you know the interstate, people toll prompts people to consider their best option. Some people are worried traffic will get worse on the side streets if drivers are looking to avoid a toll. We call this rerouting, which is a type of diversion. We already see this today as drivers are rerouting off the interstates to avoid congestion. If we do nothing, community impacts will continue to grow. The toll program wants to avoid causing neighborhood impacts. We're using computer models to predict what happens to traffic based on past observations, driver preferences, local roadway designs, development patterns, and time of day. At areas where drivers are predicted to use local roads and delay traffic enough to fail local standards of traffic flow, we will figure out how to fix the issue. For example, we could build a new turn lane, or change the timing of a traffic signal, or add bicycle and pedestrian improvements. We want to make sure you have the information about the tolling proposals under consideration. Please visit OregonTolling.org for the most up-to-date information.
Excellent. Thanks so much, MJ. We want to go to the next slide then. Kind of one of the big questions is what improvements are we getting with tolling? And so from the direction from the legislature now, going back a couple of years with HB 2017, but then more recently, just in the last legislative session, HB 3055, it really said some of these massive projects, so the Boone Bridge rebuild, the I-205 improvements, which is the Abernathy Bridge and the third lane on 205 in each direction, the Rose Corridor project that's adding auxiliary lanes and widening that section of the highway, and the I-5 interstate bridge replacement. All these projects that are anywhere from $500 million to over $1 billion, that really tolling is the key backbone for that. And the largest footprint that you'll see tolling here in the Portland Metro that we're studying now is in that dark blue on I-5 and I-205. So we'll get to, in a second, we'll talk about the timing of that. But the real key benefit, again, kind of the direction from our legislature and why we're at where we're at here today, is to get those sizable improvements in the highway system. That tolling is needed as the source to help get us over the line. Next slide. And so when would tolling start? Now it's a two-step process. There's a I-205 section that would come online at the earliest in late 2024. And then that regional system would come on board a year later. And we are concerned about that gap, what that's going to do to different diversion patterns, and if it's that's going to intensify in the Clackamas area or here through Canby. So in a second, Chris is going to go into some of the details about what we're studying and what we know today and what's coming up. And really, a lot of the information Chris is going to walk through, we're working towards that first yellow circle on the timeline for 205, which is called the draft environmental assessment. In that report, you'll see very clearly where is ODOT seeing those impacts to diversion? What are we bringing to the table as far as funding that would help address those impacts? And then what are we doing more systemically to address low-income exemptions or credits or discounts and that kind of program work? We're doing our best to try to lessen that gap between these projects and work on that regional mobility pricing project. But as you can see there, it's about a year behind where the 205 work is at. Just the other reason why 205 is kind of going first or is the first step is that they're the first ones in the region to get that improvement. The HB 2017 that was passed identified that Abernathy Bridge and that area was a need, but it provided $0 in funding. And so to keep that on its construction schedule, to hit like a key in-water work window for doing some of the pillars on the bridge this summer, we need to keep this 205 toll project on its path and heading forward. Next slide. So I'm just going to cue it up here for Chris, and then he's going to walk us through some of the early information. But this is just some of the early draft information on where we're seeing this. I believe, Mayor Hodson, you've been attending, we call it the Clackamas County Coordinating Committee Diversion Subcommittee meetings. These are monthly meetings with elected officials from each one of the cities in the area most impacted. And we really see this type of information on what is ODOT bringing to the table, what's going to be mitigation, as where we're continuing to bring this information through that committee. So with all that, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you to walk us through some of the early outputs.
Great. Thank you, Garrett. So just to kind of set the stage, here is the project area where we're making improvements. The yellow mustard colored highlight is basically I-205 between Stafford Road and Oregon 213. And then those sideways pink H's are representative of the general vicinity where we're planning on putting the toll gantries. So you can see there's 2 points where there would be tolls. So a couple things. One is you would only pass under, your trip could take you under just one if it's a shorter trip, or it could take you under both. Each gantry at this point we're looking at would have a similar toll. And while the Oregon Transportation Commission will actually set the tolls at a later date, for the environmental analysis, we had to make some kind of an assumption of what those toll rates might be. And as I think Garrett mentioned, it's a variable toll. So they range between a little over $0.50 to around $2. And the high toll rates would be during the rush hours, the peak travel times, whereas the lower end would be in those off-peak times.
Yeah. MJ, do you mind going to the next slide? Because I think that it helps to illustrate, Chris, what you were saying and put some words to that as well.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I got ahead of myself.
Yeah, no worries.
So yes, we just went through what the toll rates, what we assume they would be. And again, the OTC will set those in the future. Also, note that there will be some sort of program, and that's in development. And I think Garrett will talk a little more about that later, for people on lower incomes to make it more affordable for them to use the facility. Next slide, thank you. So this is some early information that we have. And again, for the environmental assessment, we're looking at a future year. So we're looking at year 2045. And we use computer models to kind of estimate what things are going to be like if we do nothing, so the no build, versus what they'll be like with the project. And that's the improvements on 205 plus tolling. So this shows a comparison of peak period travel times. And this is the morning rush hour here. And each of those colored lines is a different route. So, for example, the light blue or teal colored route is 205 from I-5 to Gladstone. And you can see in the little boxes that are teal colored as well. For that particular route, we're seeing an improvement in travel times. It gets about 4 minutes faster in both directions, southbound and northbound, which is about a 25% improvement in travel times during the morning rush hour. A lot of the other travel times we're not seeing much of a change, little to no change. There are a few though. So the green routes, Oregon 43, in the southbound direction, and again, this is morning, we're seeing things get slower by about 3 minutes. And that's from Hidden Springs Road to Main Street, downtown Oregon City. And then the yellow route, which is of most interest to you probably, we're seeing a mix. In the southbound direction, we're seeing increased travel time, and that's from, up in Gladstone down to Canby, so it's a pretty long stretch. We're seeing about 3 minutes, and most of that time is really incurred in the downtown Oregon City area. So the rest of that route doesn't see a huge travel time shift. And then northbound in the morning, we're actually seeing a faster time. And the majority of that time is actually between Canby and Oregon City. So that's the morning. And then the afternoon, we have, we have a number of routes that are not seeing, notable changes. But we do have a few. And again, if you go to 205, you see even larger improvements. You see southbound 7 minutes faster and northbound 15 minutes faster. And that's over 50% of the travel time right there. So you're improving things by over 50%. And that makes sense. You're adding capacity to I-205. You're putting a toll on it to try to even out the traffic flows. So it does get better. On Oregon 43, again, the green route, we're actually seeing southbound faster travel times between Hidden Springs Road and downtown Oregon City. And then the other place where we see, again, faster travel times is eastbound on Orland Road, Willamette Falls Drive. Next slide. So as I said, what we're doing is comparing conditions with the project against what they would be like with travel time, which I just talked about. And clearly diversion is a big concern. And as Garrett mentioned, not only the long-term diversion, but also the short-term, what happens with tolling even before the improvements are in place. We're also looking at safety. How does this affect safety on our systems? We're looking at impacts to other modes, not just traffic. So that includes freight and transit and non-motorized modes. We're looking at environmental impacts to air quality, noise, climate, economic impacts, so impacts to businesses. Freight works into that calculus as well. And then also certain populations, so equity populations, low income, those types of things. So it's a pretty comprehensive assessment, and all of these are being documented in their own separate technical discipline reports, and then the findings from those reports are all rolled up into the environmental assessment, again, which we're looking at this early summer being available for review. So next. And this is to give you an idea kind of the coverage of what we're looking at for the transportation analysis. So that map on the right there, that squiggly purple line, that outlines the study area, or what we're calling the area of potential impact. We initially kind of identified that by doing some early modeling of no build versus with the project, and looking at where we saw notable traffic shifts. And in that initial look, we had a bit of a smaller study area, and we had identified 34 intersections that we look at in detail within that study area. But then we went out and let local jurisdictions review it, and we got some feedback. And then we also we were constantly updating the modeling. Anyway, all said and done, we expanded the area of potential impact down to include Canby. We extended it a bit north as well, and we increased the number of intersections to 50 from 34. And a number of those intersections are in or around Canby. You know, we've got them along 99E at Ivy Streets, Redwood Streets, I think South End Road, and just taking a look, Lone Elder Road, and New Era Road. So those are ones that you'll see detailed analyses for, and you know whether or not there's expected impacts there. So with that, the next step I just want to say is that we're going to identify those, and we've got some of that already pulled together, not all of it, but as we do that, we're going to go out to local jurisdictions to talk about what we're seeing as impacts, and also to discuss what kinds of improvements we can make to mitigate those impacts. And so look for that to occur over the next, at least the initial one of those to occur over the next couple of months. Because we'd like to have a pretty good handle on that by the time the draft EA comes out in early summer. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Garrett.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. And I'll just a few more slides and then we'll be done talking here. But this is our look at accessibility. So looking at impacts to schools, nursing home, medical facilities, parks and green spaces. And this is just a little zoom in here on some of those resources that we've identified within Canby. And we're looking how the tolling and that investment would either benefit or impact the accessibility to these areas. Next slide. We also know that pavement alone can't solve this. And so we've been working Canby Area Transit as a part of our larger group of Clackamas County and regional transit providers. This is just an initial list of some of the projects we've heard about that people would like to see funded. Now, a selection probably of this list is eventually what will end up being kind of identified. But just know we're very much looking at this kind of east-west connectivity, and then the connectivity between the Clackamas, even up into like the Hillsborough, Beaverton area, as an area that really lacks the type of transportation options that are needed to provide those alternative routes to tolling or driving. Next slide. So just to get really specifically kind of on the timing of it, we know we are concerned about what tolling would do for people who can't choose to drive at a different time of day when the tolling would be highest, and also people who are just really struggling to meet basic needs and the impact this would have on their budget. So between now and June and July, You'll see on the right side of the screen, this draft environmental analysis include looking at people experiencing low income, but also children, older adults, people with a disability, limited English-speaking households, and/or racial or ethnic minority groups. And then by September will be that plan that ODOT comes up with and some options on how to address that. And we have some engagement starting as early as like the April to May timeframe on what those options could be. Next slide. So that was a lot of information, but we really did want to take the time and walk through some of that because we've heard some of the concerns and questions. And we wanted to show that there are a lot of our same concerns and questions and ones we're working on. But more specifically, we've met with the city manager and been following along with your staff. We know Canby is a growing city, housing, economic development, industrial sites. And so really, how can ODOT help the residents and businesses realize the benefits of these investments of the I-205 improvements project of a new boom bridge, but knowing that tolling comes with that. So how can we realize the benefits and address the impacts? So we'd love thoughts on that. And really this June is when a key piece of that information is going to come out. So what's the best way we can work with you to reach out to the Canby community to have those conversations so we know what revisions we need to make to the plan to answer that question, the first question here. So MJ, if you wouldn't mind bringing down the presentation, and there's our contact information if you want to follow up. But Mayor Hodson, I'll send it back.
And before we proceed, so now that we're in a hybrid Zoom situation, we are in a posture where some panelists have been raising their hands to be recognized in the panelist section, or not in the panelist, but the observer section. Mm-hmm. And that would be akin to sitting in the audience and just raising your hand in the middle of a presentation. It doesn't always mean that you're going to get your question answered until maybe afterwards. But also, we don't really have a chat feature or the bandwidth to see what people's questions are and then try to handle that. So if you guys want to call in people, I guess you'd have to observe who's in that section and try to see if they have a question.
I do have the Zoom up, and I see that Jennifer Driscoll has her hand up. Is there a way to give her chat capability so she can ask her question?
Or bring her in as a panelist.
Or bring her in as a panelist so that she can ask her question, because of course we want to hear it. I have questions when you're ready.
So as Joe works on that with Melissa, Sean, you had said you had some questions.
I do. Yeah, thank you guys so much for your presentation. I do appreciate it. I'm sure that everybody loves talking to you guys about tolling. I've got a couple of questions, and with all due respect, I think that your study is a little bit bogus there. If you think there is no change in 2045 to traffic on 99 or only 3 minutes, I think there's a little bit more homework to do, because we're noticing even just over this last 6 to 8 months that people getting back to normal life has increased traffic. So I'd really like you guys to dive a little bit deeper into that, because I don't believe you that we're not going to have any change in traffic. The other question that I would like to see you guys answer, and maybe this isn't tonight, maybe this is later on down the road, is were safety improvements considered when you considered the traffic time on 99? When you add, I'm just guessing, I'm sure you guys probably have a number of cars that you're going to add. People are going to take off before, if the toll gantry is going to be after the Abernathy Bridge and after the exit through Canby, people are going to exit and drive through Canby. So we're going to see an increase. And if safety improvements were not considered on 99E between the between the exit and Canby, we're going to see more accidents. We're going to see a lot more issues there that's going to actually slow down traffic. So I think that's something that maybe you guys studied that, I don't know. And then if the purpose is to fix the Abernathy Bridge, why on earth are we putting the toll gantry after the Abernathy Bridge? If the goal is to get money to fix the Abernathy Bridge, why not put the toll gantry prior to the bridge so that people don't take off on 99 and drive down through Canby and not pay the toll? Because it seems that if the purpose is to raise money to fix the bridge, you would want to put that gantry somewhere prior to the bridge that you're trying to fix. So those are just the questions I have. I just think that there's a little bit of information that still needs to be considered as far as what the impacts on Canby and the areas through. I just don't see how that can be accurate whatsoever, that there won't be any change between now and 2045.
Thank you, sir. Counselor Hensley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I second everything. He pretty much stole my quotes there. It's same questions I had. But also, I was wondering when the study was done, the traffic changes are obviously going to be different if everybody's working at home and now everybody's returning to work. So no change in traffic seems like it might have been done the study might have been done when everyone's working remotely. And I really haven't heard a clear plan on diversion mitigation. So I don't have a lot of confidence in this tolling project going forward. So I guess my comments are more comments than questions. That's all I have right now. Let me think.
Yeah, Garrett or Chris, did you want to speak to either of those?
Yeah. Chris, do you mind I'll take a first shot and then.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are good questions. And definitely that June timeframe is where I'd point to as far as we'll share the math and share all the data on kind of what we're studying and why we're seeing that little to no impact out in 2045. I mean, we definitely do have more study to do. So there may be impacts that we find in these next couple of months because we are looking at a safety analysis up and down that corridor on what improvements would be needed if we conduct that. To say all that, that's a part of the study. And in that June timeframe, that's also when you'll see ODOT point to what is the mitigation plan, what are the projects and investments we would be bringing to address those local impacts. So that's the first part of it. And then the second part of it, I'd say, is we can do the planning and think about this and project how it's going to act, but we won't know until tolling is in place. And so as we're developing the toll system, we'll also develop a monitoring and accountability system to go with that. And so if there are factors that you want us to look at or consider long-term, kind of once tolls are in place, we would love to get that type of feedback as well to bring that to the Oregon Transportation Commission, as they'll be the ones setting and deciding the toll rates kind of once they are in place and making any adjustments going forward.
And I just wanted to add, because I think there's a misconception. Those travel times that we were showing, that was for future year 2045, and those for the no build, those travel times are definitely slower than they are today. So yes, we see a lot of congestion occurring between now and 2045, just because there will be traffic growth. And if you do nothing to the system, clearly things will get worse. So the comparison that you were seeing was between what things are like in 2045 if nothing is done versus what they're like with this particular project in place. They're both fairly, probably their travel times are slower than they are today. In both of those future cases, you were just seeing the difference between the future no build and the future build. So just wanted to clear that up.
So before going to Councilor Spoon and Councilor Bangs, Chris, just to clarify, so what that 2045 that you put up a 3 or 4 minute change on 99, so that's after building the toll gantries, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And again, that is in comparison to 2045 without doing the project. So a lot of
the project being the Abernathy Bridge rebuild and the third lane on 205 in each direction.
Right. Okay.
That's wrapped up in that.
Okay.
And one of the reasons you're seeing some sizable travel time differences is because in the no build, that Borland Road, Willamette Falls Drive, that segment gets really slow. I mean, it's very congested without any improvements. So, and the build, because we're adding capacity to 205, we're actually seeing people paying the toll and getting on 205 because it's a much faster trip, so it's worth it to them. And we're seeing a little less traffic, particularly on the stretch of Willamette Falls Drive between 10th and Oregon 43, because that stretch of 205 isn't tolled, so people can jump on that and take a free trip if they want. So anyway, there's a lot of things like that going on that it's a complicated system, but I did want to say that definitely things are not going to be the same or better than they are now in 2045. What you're seeing is just the difference between a no build and a build in 2045.
Okay, thank you.
You guys didn't answer the question though about the location of the toll gantry. Why can't we put it prior to the Abernathy Bridge and prior to the 99E exit? It doesn't make sense to me to put it where you have it.
For it or just after it. There's some limitations in federal law where you can put that and then also get funding for that reconstruction piece. So there is some variability where that can move kind of just prior to it or just after it. This is kind of our assumption for studying, but it does have to stay within a certain geographic area tied to the actual footprint of the construction of those bridges.
So you can study to see whether you could put it prior to the bridge, prior to the 99 exit?
Yeah, I think to the 99 exit, Chris, you know?
On the north side of the bridge or east side?
If you're coming southbound on 205, can you put it prior to the exit into Canby, prior to the 99 exit?
I don't know for sure because I don't know what that range is that you.
Yeah, let us check on that and we can get back to you on that. That's a good question.
Please do.
2020 the project itself, which won't be complete for quite some time. But I really feel like I need to see some data on how the implementation of tolling causes traffic diversion, because I don't think that your modeling or your report really covered that at all.
Yeah, I think, well, we can go back a little bit to see, because the I-205 improvements project, the construction project alone, had some environmental analysis done. But really for this toll project and this study, our hands are kind of tied, or we've been directed by the legislature and ODOT leadership that you really the improvements, that third lane and the tolling assumed with it, are kind of tied into being the same piece. Really what you're seeing, because an explicit goal of our project is trying to limit the diversion, we're trying to kind of ratchet down the pricing and get it to a place where it does hit that sweet spot of generating enough dollars to get the third lane in each direction, but not continuing to spill people off the highway to hit diversion. So
right.
I think that's the best we'll get kind of sure. As far as this study.
As you say that, what's the estimated completion of the third lane project and the Abernathy Bridge project?
I have to check on the timing schedule. I think it's on the project website. We can send it over to you. I think it's like 2027, 2026, okay. Somewhere around in there.
So my question is, my concern is between 2024 and 2026 or 7 then, when we don't have the additional lanes, but we do have the tolling. Yep. I haven't really seen any data on that. And I think that's the question many of us really have. That immediate impact before the congestion's alleviated by the completion of the project. I mean, that's a 3-year period. It's not insignificant, right?
Yeah, it's a good question, yeah.
My final question is, the video that you played for us talked about potential mitigations for traffic diversion being like a turn lane, timing of stoplights or bike lanes. But as you know, the intersections we're talking about that directly impact our community are Redwood in 99, Ivy in 99, South Renton Road, New Era Road. And I don't really see how any of those suggested mitigation is helpful in those particular areas. I could see, a turn lane is maybe helpful on 99 in Milwaukee Gladstone, where you have that type of traffic pattern, but our traffic pattern is different because we would basically become a thoroughfare without a bunch of stoplights, right? It's a very different traffic pattern. So what mitigation efforts are even possible when you're talking about a fully built out area where people aren't turning, they're just trying to get through town, or some of these intersections which are like, it's a cliff, a road, and then a cliff, right? And you're not widening 99 between Oregon City and Canby. So I'm just unsure, based on the information you gave us about mitigation efforts, about what's even really possible for our community, because none of the suggested ones are appropriate.
Sure. It's a good question. And so what you'll see happening in the next few months here, because downtown Oregon City, I think, is facing a similar limited space place down there. So you'll see us as we hone in on those intersections Chris had on the map. That's when we start to have conversations with local cities, or we'd come to City of Canby, look at what's on your transportation system plan. What are y'all planning for as far as how to address those needs? Because we know they're there today and are going to continue to grow. So just some thoughts on like, could there be improvements made prior or later in the road that maybe could address some of the bottleneck headed into some of these key intersections? Could there be investments in a transportation alternatives or options that would not be pavement on the ground, but might help get fewer people in single cars and get them moving through? So it's a tough question. It's one I think we know that will basically work hand in hand with the local cities to help figure out though when we do identify it through that analysis.
And a couple of those intersections that you mentioned, I think South End Road and New Era Road are unsignalized, right? So a possible mitigation is signalize them as well. And that would also have the effect of probably not making it as an attractive of a diversion route, if you have to stop at more signals. But anyway, those are, as Garrett says, it has to be something that works for you as well. That's what we're going to sit down and kind of work through.
Thank you.
Councilor Bangs?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions here. Though first, at point, if one of our mitigation strategies was to add a traffic light at South End Road, it seems to me that would slow down the time between Canby and Oregon City rather than increase it. One question I had is how is it that traffic times can improve between Canby and Oregon City with this tolling, which predominantly affects east-west travel? Canby people don't typically take that stretch of 205. If you're trying to end up there, you go through Barlow and up I-5. So I just don't understand how it would improve our northbound morning commute, beyond what we already expect it to be, which is a greater amount of traffic.
Yeah.
Chris, do you want to take a shot at that? Yeah.
I can take a shot. So what we see happening is that I-5 itself, as it gets to the I-205 junction, that actually starts to clear up a little bit because you don't have backups from 205 onto I-5. So that whole route, I-5 to 205, becomes faster. And yes, there's a toll on it, but again, people make that choice of how much time do they save versus paying that toll. And we're seeing that there's a bit more that actually in the morning going northbound, and actually I think in the afternoon going northbound as well, are choosing to take that route and stay on 205 instead of going north through Canby. I want to also mention that, one of the things we did earlier on was a corridor user analysis to see, what's happening, who's using 205 now. And as part of that, we looked at what happens when 205 is congested and where do people go. And we know that they do take 99 now. I mean, we've got data that shows that. They take other routes as well. But so it's already being used as a shortcut, or an avoidance of congestion. So this project takes some of that congestion away. It does add a toll. So there's kind of a plus and minus thing going on, but some of that traffic that's diverting now will choose to actually pay a toll and not divert because there isn't as much congestion. That's just, and again, as Garrett says, that's the best. These are the best tools we have to try to predict what's going to happen. At the same time, we're going to predict that and identify where we think there are impacts. But at the same time, we're going to have a monitoring program out there to see what really happens on the ground to help verify, did we get it right or not? So.
Has this happened before? I'm aware of tolling being used to finance the construction of freeways. I think it's common in the East Coast. Have tolls been added anywhere on freeways that were already built?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it's more limited. I think you go to like the San Francisco area, and then there's some work now being done in New York where they're tolling that to pay for light rail development that happens alongside the existing highway. Fewer examples, but it is sort of a movement in some of the United States.
It's happened in Seattle as well. So the 520 bridge across Lake Washington was tolled in order to widen it, and in fact the tolls were put on before it was widened.
Well, I think the counselor, he's speaking to places where there wouldn't be widening, correct? Where it'd be.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So is the purpose of the tolling to raise the money necessary to put the seismic upgrades and add the lane of traffic on 205? Or is the purpose of the tolling to change the behavior of traffic users?
It's a both and. It's a raise the revenue and manage congestion. So that's direction from the legislature in setting up the toll program. So how you see that work is, like we were talking about before, we'll study what's the toll rate needed to pay for those improvements. But then how do we make sure that these improvements don't just last us 20 years, but really last us into perpetuity? And that's the demand management piece of the toll rate setting as well.
Now, I thought, and I probably have this wrong, but I thought that my legislator had told me that the legislator itself did not actually express an interest in tolling, that was the Oregon Transportation Commission's idea.
We can send you the legislation and where it specifically lists out that HB 2017 vote that I keep referencing, and then HB 3055 just last year, where the legislature voted to kind of reapprove the tolling work and give us a little more financial flexibility with it.
Sure. Now, is the tolling expected to pay for these improvements, or is the federal government expected to pay for these improvements? Because you had mentioned about you could put the tolling gate on the bridge and how it would affect our ability to collect federal money for that. So I'm just wondering if that's what the tolling is paying for.
So the piece there, just a quick clarification on that, it wouldn't be to gain or not gain federal money. It would be to gain federal authorization to toll an existing highway and to do that reconstruction. So the dollars that are being planned for as far as what funds the I-205 improvements specifically are some of the dollars that were at one time allocated from the legislature, $30 million a year just to Rose Corridor. That's now been separated and ODOT's allowed to use that on more projects. So some of that is kind of starting the I-205 improvements project, but the rest of the dollars that'll pay for the I-205 improvements project are coming from the toll revenues.
Okay. Your slideshow or your film it indicated, no, I think it was your slideshow, that it may require federal approval. But I was just kind of curious why we were unsure about that.
So there's two different federal programs we're going into. So for the 205 toll project, where I showed you the toll gantries on the bridges, that's section 129. And then to not go too deep into this, that's much more, if you meet the rules of the law, you're allowed to go forward and toll. Now, the regional mobility pricing project, that bigger blue footprint on I-5 and I-205, where you would actually be tolling, where you wouldn't be expanding roadway or reconstructing bridges, that's a different type of federal approval. And so you actually need the Secretary of Transportation for U.S. Department of Transportation to sign off on it after you've gone through your environmental study. So it's kind of another check step in the system before that can be approved.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
And some legislation, and frankly, Chris, I can go back to the 1986 legislature, in which the Senate Transportation Committee acknowledged that at some point Oregon was going to have to move towards tolling, towards a user fee, because those damn hippies were going to be driving electric cars and not paying gas tax. So we can blame the hippies on that one. But I did want to emphasize one of the things that was pointed out earlier, that we're going to have pain before gain. It's always nice to try and have what you're buying come not 2 or 3 years later, but now or before. So again, this is not a situation of your design. I would like you to take me back and walk me through the logic you had for how during rush hour, traffic on 205 will become less congested. And back to Councillor Varwig's earlier question here of what are we, when we say less, are we talking about a theoretical greater time in the future, or I'm afraid there's a lot of confusion when you talk about less traffic. People are thinking, oh, it's going to be less traffic than it is right now. But I suspect the vocabulary you're using is talking about a reduction in the growth of congestion. Anyway, here's what I'm trying to understand. If during rush hour, you're going to have less congestion on 205, how will you achieve that congestion without people diverting?
Sure. So there's a few things under the term diverting. And one of those one of it is a term we sometimes call rerouting. So people getting off the highway to avoid the toll itself. You also have, as part of diversion, people choosing a different time to travel. So instead of 4 to 6 p.m., maybe they take a later time, maybe they come before. In areas, now in the Clackamas area, this is a little more difficult because you don't have the transportation options that you do up there in Portland. But people could get into transit, carpool, fan pool. We see a little mode shift. That's what we call it when people start taking, instead of single cars, they kind of group up together. We see some of that happening, not a lot on this 205 project, but that's a way folks could do it. We see businesses or others, like we had during COVID, choosing to telework, and so taking those trips off. We see folks that 4 and 5 trips currently get on and get off one of those 7 exits in this stretch that we're studying. And so instead of people hopping on to hop back off the highway quickly, if you're going to do a local trip, you kind of stay on those local roads to the grocery store instead of trying to gain that extra time up on the highway and off. So really just it's a small shift sometimes, maybe even less than 10% of all the drivers that are driving 4 to 6 p.m. in the afternoon. Or Chris, what's the morning time?
7 to 9.
7 to 9. So just maybe it's a small percentage shift in that, and it can have huge kind of domino effects as far as reducing that congestion. In addition, with the third lane in each direction, those are 2 of our congestion killers kind of out into the future.
Right. And I wanted to say too, what we're seeing is that less people proportionately are choosing to reroute during the peak times than during other times. And that's because the alternate routes are also congested. And again, this is 2045. Things are worse than they are today on those alternate routes. So, middle of the night, roads are free. You'll choose not to pay a toll because it's not too bad taking those alternate routes. But when those alternate routes are stop and go traffic, and you've improved 205 by adding that lane, some folks will, be less likely to reroute off of that.
So let me make sure I have this correct. When you're talking about less, we're talking about less worse.
Yes, we are.
Not more better.
It's not a problem.
Yes, if you're comparing it to today, it would be less worse. Yes.
Thank you, Councilor Parker.
We're trying to assess the information that you're providing. When we see what's the 27 outlook, what's the 45 outlook, I think that would really help people wrap their heads around it. And you were asking for recommendations on impact. I don't know that you necessarily have the flexibility to do this, but if you could, something that might really mitigate the impacts would be spreading out the toll area a little bit further if not all of 205 at once, which would be my personal preference, let everybody ease into 205 as the toll road, period, the end to start. If you can't do all of 205, if we could at least do the 205-5 split up to the Gladstone exit, anybody who's really coming through the south end of 205 is going to have lots of options to choose from to decide where it is that they need to get off. In the current proposal, almost everybody is going to go down 99, and a handful of people are going to add to the craziness that already exists on 43. So there aren't a lot of good options for all those people who are going to avoid up to a $4 a pop toll. I mean, lots of people are going to balk at $4. I mean, I know you said that you don't have the final numbers yet, but that's hefty. And there's going to be a lot of people who, no matter what your financial mitigation options are for lower income families, there's people who couldn't get their tax refunds because they didn't have bank accounts. They're not going to be able to navigate getting set up with the little toll pass to be able to use 205. They're going to use alternate routes. There's going to be many more people on the routes that we're talking about, 99 that we're concerned about, where there really isn't anywhere else to go but straight down 99. And that really causes a lot of problems for our community and really for commuters too. It's just not going to be pretty. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Mr. Boatwright, here in the chambers. Good evening, sir.
Evening. Larry Boatwright, 1370 Southeast 12th Loop, Canby. I have no questions, and I have some of my own opinions. One thing I am pleased to hear the counselors that kind of don't think this is such a good idea. My opinion is they say this was built to reduce congestion. Now, I don't know how they think they're going to reduce congestion by putting tolls on 205. I've traveled down those roads for 40 years. I've taken all the alternative routes when there was an accident on 205. And everybody else dumps off onto those routes too, and it's nothing but a traffic jam. That's what's going to happen when they put the tolls on. $2 an hour during peak rush hour. Well, most of us blue collar guys work those hours. We're traveling during the peak hours. We can't work virtually because we work in machine shops, we work in warehouses and stuff like that. The traffic on 99E, all of these things that they think they're going to do to mitigate the traffic on 99E is bull. It won't work. Because every time there's a mitigation and you come down another lane, it just stops all the traffic behind it. I believe the purpose of this thing is one, revenue. That you're seeing they're promising all the schools and all these different projects money off of this thing to grease the skids. That's what it's all about, and that's what they do every time. They want 2045. They got these projections out to 2045. It's bull. They can't see 5 years down the road, let alone 27 years down the road. The toll booths are in the wrong places. We got taxes called gas fuel taxes to pay for roads and bridges. Quit diverting that money to railroads and rapid transit. The purpose of this is to get us out of our cars. It always has been. Every plan that comes out of Salem, that's what they want. They want high fuel prices. They want us out of our cars. That's the whole thing about it. This is all a pipe dream. And we've got to build the damn thing before we know whether it's going to work or not. How many times have we heard that? My only problem is this has been in the loop for a long time. I sat on the planning commission, and every time we had a meeting, I brought up the fact that you haven't seen anything yet with traffic until they build this toll on 205. And I guarantee you, it's all coming down 99E, McLaughlin Boulevard, 43. And it's going to cost a worker $80 a month. $80 extra a month, not mentioning the the gas prices that are going up, probably to $6 an hour until we get some sanity in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Clackamas County be equitable? How will this work for a family barely paying rent that needs to use the freeway to get to Tigard or to Wallaton for work and childcare? I know you mentioned that you're working on this, but it sounds like every time that somebody has a question, your answer is, we're working on it. I'd love ODOT to explain to a working family or an elderly person on a limited income how tolling will work for them. Carpooling bikes and buses are not viable solutions for most of Oregon. Why should Clackamas County bear this heavy burden? It's going to cause Oregon City, West Linn, Gladstone, Canby, you name it, all these cities around here that are going to have to deal with diversion. It's going to be absolute chaos. It's not going to create the system that seems so nice in the slides, where congestion is just relieved. Finally, why should we trust ODOT? They haven't shown due diligence of fiscal responsibility with the major debt that's gone on with the Rose Quarter or the West Line. Citizens deserve the right to vote on tolling. It should have been put in front of the voters. And I would urge everyone in this room to contact Peter Courtney and your rep to support SJR 204, the bill that's been introduced to vote before tolls.
Tolling, or is that going to be looked at pre-tolling or congestion pricing, pardon me?
Well, it involves studying both. It installs without the tolling or congestion pricing and without the 205 improvements, and it studies 2027 and 2045 with the tolling and with the improvements. Does that help answer your question? Or?
Well, it's taking me longer down 99. I might as well pay the $2 or $4 to make the loop around 205 to I-5 down to Salem versus 99. Has that been looked at in other areas in terms of how long does an individual's diversion patterns and behaviors last?
Gotcha. It's a good question. And Chris, I think we talked about this at the 12th in City Council, actually. So some of the national studies show it takes about 6, maybe 9 months at the longest, but about 6 months for people to, first, the diversion does get worse, like you're saying, because they see it's a change to the system, new roads. But within that 4, 6, 9 month range, that type of thing, that's when you see the patterns kind of reestablish themselves. People find that, I'll pay the money to then get the reliability of that trip on the highway. So that's generally on this state.
Just for people to get used to a tolling system. And I know someone mentioned
ish in quotes. So then is there not a need then for looking at mitigation and diversion issues?
It's a good question. I think that's the question, that prioritization and timing on when mitigation happens or what happens long term, that we're going to at least take our initial draft plan at what that looks like and work with the C4 diversion subcommittee in these upcoming months between now and June to help answer.
Okay. Of how long it will take to pay off these improvements?
That's after the environmental assessment. So that's in 2023. In 2023 is when those conversations start. But I can get back to you on that.
That'd be great. And then I'm presuming that there's an annual increase in the tolling would be factored in for inflationary pieces as well. So it's 60 cents to $2 to start with. Has there been discussion of what that's to start with? Has there been discussion of what that's going to look like in terms of an annual increase?
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that's an annual increase, just from how I see other toll rates and programs set up. But that question's still on the table. And again, that's a part of that year to year and a half of toll rate setting that would start in early 2023 and then go through 2024.
Okay. And then back to, I think it was Ms. O'Brien's comment. She asked about funding staying localized to that area for improvements and whatnot. And I know that that's a conversation, I guess it's more answering Ms. O'Brien's comment, is that I know that the tolling work group, the R1 Act, and then the Clackamas County Coordinating Committee are all, and then the Clackamas County Coordinating Committee are all pressing for whatever funding is created, and when that comes about, that is put back into the local area that the tolling is occurring. So I know that there's, what is that radius that's being discussed and looked at? So I know that that's going on. And finally, because then Councilor Hensley has a question, and I think, David, did you have a question or no?
I know all about that.
Okay. To me, it seems like, and I've said this before, that the tolling or the traffic mitigation, congestion pricing piece is a foregone conclusion, right? It's in House Bill 2017. I've been corrected twice now by Chair Van Brocklin at the OTC about, when did this become a funding, when did the funding implementation become a tolling piece? And so I get it. He's told me twice. I won't ask again. But it seems to me, because this is a foregone conclusion, and please understand that I do appreciate Garrett and Chris and your team coming tonight and spending the time with us. It seems that our job, and please understand that what we're trying to do, because we believe that this is a foregone conclusion, is to make this less sucky for the citizens of Canby as we commute throughout. And I think that that's kind of the direction for most of Clackamas County, as was stated by some of our earlier citizens, that Clackamas County is footing this bill dramatically for this piece. And so it's not that, I'm sure you both are very nice people, it's just a subject matter that we're not real excited about.
Sure.
So, Councilor Hensley, did you have another question?
To make things so undesirable to drive your car, your behavior from ODOT that's going to protect our community from the diversion traffic. It's sounding a whole lot like we got to pass the bill before we read the bill. Here we are, we're going to pass tolling before we find out what we're going to do about the effects of tolling. I think that a lot more research and studies need to be done on what can be doing to mitigate the impact on our communities. I know there's a lot of folks that have been reaching out to me who aren't in favor of this plan, and I do know that there is an initiative petition project underway, and so if anybody is interested in learning more about that, they can go to notollarmy.com and learn how they can get more information and see what citizens can do to fight this. I just don't think this was thought out, and I just feel like the bureaucrats are not listening and to what the impacts to our communities could be. And so I didn't really have a question. I just had some comments to get off my chest. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's problems sitting on the damn planning commission for all those years in the our code, and I don't think if we don't do what they say, all that, and then that's just like
$400 million. What they have said, because they got a letter from the Clackamas County cities and requesting money be shifted to the Abernathy Bridge, their communication back was that because of the great, basically the statewide needs and the needs other places and the plan that tolling would pay for the improvements, that they don't see that dipping into that $400 million pot is a direction they want to go. So again, we're the messengers passing that on, but that's what we've received as far as answering some information on that question.
Okay, thank you. One more thought from Councilor Hensley.
That would be much appreciated.
Excellent, will do.
Thank you.
I don't think we have any other questions or comments from the council right now. Gentlemen and your team, I'll say MJ because that's what I heard her referred to.
Thank you for your agenda time to do that. We really appreciate that.
Council President Hensley. To approve the consent agenda that includes the minutes of the January 5th, 2022 City Council regular meeting, the appointment of Jennifer Driscoll to the Traffic Safety Commission for a term that will expire on June 30th, 2023, and the appointment of John Malamphy to the Canby Utility Board for a term expiring on February 28th, 2025. All those in favor, say aye. Show of hands.
Aye.
Anyone
1, 2, 3, 4
against?
screen.
Yep. The first one is resolution number 13. Governmental agreement between the City of Canby and Clackamas County related to road maintenance and permitting authority of South Ivy Street. And Mr. Archer, that's yours.
Thank you, Mayor Hodson and members of the council. Actually, the next two items, this item and the next, are both related to each other, and I'll explain the next one after we go through this. These are both related to the upcoming improvements of Ivy Street, South Ivy Street, related to a couple of different projects, and that is the county's project to, well, the county and the city's partnership project to just generally improve Ivy Street south from 99 down to about 13th. So the county still owns that portion of Ivy. And this agreement that is in front of you with this resolution allows us as the city to take the jurisdiction for the maintenance and permitting portions of that roadway while the county still owns it and before the projects are completed. So as essentially what we need to be able to do is have some ability to control that roadway while we're doing the project. It also ties into the other part of this, which is which will be a little bit more focused on in the next item, which is the direction from the council to pursue undergrounding of the utilities. And there's going to be some coordination between the city and Canby Utility. So there's really three entities involved in this whole thing, which is Clackamas County, the city, and then Canby Utility with the undergrounding. So this agreement essentially gives us the ability to have some authority over that roadway while the projects are going on. Mr. Nelzine, our Public Works Director, and his team will need some abilities to have like permitting and flagging control over that stretch of the roadway. So that's what this first piece is just simply gives us, the county assigns us the ability to have a good amount of control over that. I should say, as we do these projects and we complete the improvements of Ivy, eventually our prior agreement going back a ways with the county is that once the improvements on Ivy are completed, we will then take ownership of South Ivy from 99 basically to the southern city limits, which is about the bridge at Molalla, at the Molalla River. So that will eventually come to our ownership, but that doesn't happen until the projects are completed. So this is part one, and then I'll talk about the other piece, which is funding related to undergrounding. So we're asking for approval of the resolution which authorizes the IGA with the county.
Okay. Any questions or of staff? Councilor Parker?
Well, no, I just want to give credit where credit's due. We were at a stalemate for a decade on what to do with the county-owned roads in the city. And Mayor, it really was your leadership that pushed this through. We're not getting everything we want from the county. We're getting some funds, but at least we're taking our roads that are within our jurisdiction into our responsibility. So
or so, maybe $0.3 million. That was our best estimate for costing on that. Canby Utility had committed to giving us a credit of $310,000 in that process. What has transpired since then, and that IGA was approved by council, but then we handed it over to CUB, and it kind of stayed with them for a little while, and then we actually had the opportunity to revisit that arrangement with CUB. And so, credit to Mr. Nalzine and his continued great efforts in working with CUB and with our partners at Canby Utility, we came up with what we believe is a much better solution, which is Canby Utility has actually now proposed that they would be the contractor. They would do the work themselves. We would still pay for our portion of it that we're asking for. They would still give us the $310,000 credit that they agreed to. Where that just as a reminder, where the $310,000 credit came from was that was the amount that Canby Utility estimated that they were going to pay to move the overhead lines anyway in the project. And so either way, either way, they were going to spend that amount of money. And so they're crediting that to us because obviously they won't have to move the power lines. They'll just be undergrounded. What we've come up with, and again, thanks to the efforts of the staff team over at Canby Utility, their leadership, and again, a lot of credit to Mr. Nalzine for just continued good work, is Canby Utility would like to, and they've proposed to do the work themselves. This is a pretty typical thing over time. The city and CUB work together on projects, and often they'll do utility work that is on the city's behalf, and then we'll just simply reimburse them. As you well know, CUB is a subdivision of the city anyway, so we have a close relationship there and how that works. So what we're asking for here, why I'm explaining all this, is because you actually approved something before, we gave it to CUB, and then essentially we tore that agreement up. They did not approve it on their end, so that has not been ratified. What we're representing to you is just a simple expenditure request. So we already have money budgeted. We believe that this arrangement, doing it this way, is going to save us a substantial amount of money. This is an ordinance that would give me the authority to then basically work with CUB to pay for the phase of work that we had already proposed, which is essentially 99 to about 11th was the original discussion on the project. The reason that you need to provide this ordinance approval is because our city charter requires it. And if you have any questions about that, Mr. Lindsay could explain that further. But essentially, even though we've budgeted for this project, our charter still requires that any expenditure over $50,000 has to be approved by council via ordinance. So that's what the mechanics of this are, and it's 2 readings and 30 days waiting period after that. But again, what I want to emphasize here is this is a much more beneficial arrangement. This ordinance is a not to exceed of $400,000 expenditure authority that you would be giving me to work with CUB to get this part of the work done. So now the next part of this is what we're hoping will happen, and we won't be able to know this until we've done this first part of the work, which is that initial project up to 11th. We are hopeful that the cost savings we'll realize because of this arrangement will allow us actually to finish the work all the way to 13th. That's not accounted for yet in this ordinance, but we would like to proceed with this with your authority, work with CUB, and then if we are able to do so, and if the costs remain the same, if the costs remain within the amount that we believe it will, our budget would allow us then hopefully to take that work out to 13th. So what we would do is come back to you with some further requests to finish the project there. So that is not an absolute certainty, but it is a hope that we'll then be able to just do the undergrounding all the way to 13th. This still is going to require some work with our staff, with Mr. Nalzine, and with CUB on the individual property owners, where we have to do those drop services and underground through people's properties and get permissions. And we've already kind of begun a little bit of the advanced work on that, but that'll be part of this as well. We feel pretty confident that we're going to get most, if not all, of the property owners hopefully to agree to allow us to do that. Otherwise, we have maybe a few still of those overhead service poles, but I think for the most part, we're going to see an undergrounded project. So again, what we're asking for tonight is approval of an ordinance that gives me authority to go forth and expend the city's funds to do that first part of the project, and then hopefully we'll be back talking to you about taking that project further to 13.
That's fantastic. The fact that this project gave me a little bit of heartburn because we weren't able to do it all the way to 13th and underline all the lines. So Jerry, dig deep, sharpen that pencil, and see if we can get to that 13th. So that's huge. Counselor Parker and Counselor Bajorn was turned over of a serial meeting occurring, and that a decision was made prior to the city council meeting and ultimate appointment of said planning commissioners. The thread that was turned in asked to kind of read into for the record, so I will do that, so bear with me.
Your Honor, we can also make a copy available if you're going to do that, so that if people want to review it again, it can be a part of the, we can attach it to the packet online.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the exchange starts from Counselor Parker on December 30th. Good evening, David. I wanted to give you a heads up. Tomorrow I'm going to be forwarding some information to you about the process involving the Planning Commission appointments. To my way of thinking, the mayor and council, or Varwig, have abused the process in order to get their own people on. Basically, there were 3 people who had applied for the deadline, but Varwig postponed the meeting until 2 more people applied after the deadline. And of course, there were 2 people that Brian and Sean decided to appoint. In any way, I'm thinking about taking the rather extraordinary act of pulling the appointment on the Planning Commission and confirming the 3 who followed the rules and got their application in on time. But let me get the documentation to you, and I can first tonight send you the application, and you can see for yourself that the last 2 people are from a plumbing company. One of them works for the other, and they have no civic experience. Councilor Bajorn responded, interesting, okay, I'll review it and get it when I get it, and we can discuss further. Councilor Parker responded, miraculously, the applications included in the council packet were the information necessary to conclude that one plumber works for the other is eliminated, but it wasn't before. In other words, the public cannot determine this information, so they modified the application after the process. Councilor Bajorn responded, it's interesting that they both came in late, work with each other, and both referred by Sean. Councilor Parker, let me show you a chart that Councilor Chris Bangs put together. Please do. I'm a study of patterns. There's a chart in the thread. Councilor Parker, it's all kind of shady, but if in fact they did alter official documents that were submitted to the city and subsequently older documents that came to the council, it places in question the integrity of materials that are presented to the council. I've asked Joe and Scott to review the sequence of how the original applications of the plumbers are different than the ones that are submitted to the council. What it looks like is that either Brian or Sean wanted to eliminate documentation that one of these plumbers worked for the other, which, if true, means that they altered documents in order to achieve an outcome. Councilor Parker goes on to say, anyway, to remediate this, Bangs is going to move that Judy and Chris Calkins be substituted for the 2 plumbers. We're asking Joe how the parliamentary process of amending this will go. Let me know if that's something that you would feel comfortable supporting. Oh, and as a matter of history, 2 city councilors in the past have had their spouses on the Planning Commission. A former councilor named Todd Rocha and Tracy Hensley's husband was appointed to the Planning Commission. Sarah prefers to abstain, so we would need your vote to make it happen. That's not meant to influence your decisions. That's just to have you understand the dynamics we're dealing with. Councilor Bajorn, I've lived in a job where there's a process and a box to check for everything that's done. If something gets checked off in a way that seems too quick or too good to be true, there's a perception it was gun-decked, where you didn't actually do it correctly, but claimed you did. I fully support putting this in the light for the integrity of the City of Canby and for the integrity of the council. Next question is, when do you think this will be put in front of us? Councilor Parker responded, it's on agenda for Wednesday. Perfect. I'll be ready to support a vote of integrity. Thank you. Councilor Parker goes on to say, of course, this just seems too fishy, not to mention the interview process for a new councilor We rejected someone for not being a Canby resident for the 12 months prior to appointment. How is this any different? You don't extend a deadline unless you're trying to set an outcome. That was Councilor Bajoran, Councilor Parker. The first red flag was when Judy notified me that without explanation, the first set of interviews earlier in the month had been canceled only 30 minutes prior to when they were scheduled. At the same time, there were 3 candidates for 3 positions, Dan, Judy, and Chris. I chatted with Sean about the reason for the cancellation, and his only explanation was it's being handled. Then a week later, and 2 days after the deadline, 2 plumbers who work for the same company applied and put on their form that they were referred by Sean. I am open to an innocent explanation, but on the surface, it appears that he canceled the interviews in order to put out and recruit 2 people to replace the 2 people he didn't want. Then after the interviews, someone, presumably Sean, submitted to Melissa altered application forms that are in our agenda packet. Councilor Bajoran responded, it's perception and this looks shifty. Councilor Parker, both Bangs and I have sent Joe and Scott emails asking them to look into this for us. And one other thing, even though the process does not call for the planning director to be a part of the interview selection, it's traditionally been done. And on the first scheduled interviews, the planning director was going to be part of the process. Then during the second scheduled interviews, he was out of town. Now I guess it could be argued that they didn't want to further delay the process, and therefore they proceeded without the planning director, but there's that. Councilor Bajoran, this all seems like a concerted effort to establish a PC, Planning Commission, that leans heavily one direction. Councilor Parker, and the funny thing is that 98% of the work the Planning Commission has no political compass. My argument with the conservatives that Brian has appointed in the past is that they are lazy and cancel meetings when there's not a planning request in front of them instead of working to update our outdated development code. The strangest piece of logic that I can string together is that Brian and Sean are going through all this in order to avoid Jason Padden becoming chair. They don't want to give him additional credentials so that he can run for either council or mayor. Sean has told me that if Brian doesn't run, he will run for mayor. I'm just a citizen lawmaker who is trying to make the city better, and the last thing I think about is my political future. So it's kind of hard for me to grasp such a seemingly outlandish plot for such small political gain. But as my daddy used to say, don't try to figure out a crazy person, they're crazy. Councilor Bajoran, also can't fix stupid, and that's what this is. I don't know if they thought no one would notice. Councilor Parker, I know it feels like the gang who can't shoot straight. Councilor Bajoran, that's why I don't worry about a revolution. Wow. Councilor Parker, yeah. Please let me read through this. Councilor Parker, all right, so the changed resumes were a technical glitch and not conspiracy, but still, Bangs is going to move to approve Chris, Judy, and Dan. I'm going to second, and Sarah is going to abstain. Is that a motion you can support? Councilor Bajoran, absolutely. The timeline is what concerns me. It's shifty at best. January 5th, well, that was interesting. Councilor Parker, yes, it was. One of the things that I want to bring up in the retreat is both liaison appointment process and the committee appointment process. I am going to propose that the council and not the mayor decide who will be the liaisons. That's the way it was before Brian was mayor, and I think we should return to it. Secondly, I think that the appointment should be done by the entire council, with the entire council receiving the packets of applicants. Councilor Bajoran, I agree. I just messaged Jason Padden thanking him for hitting the nail on the head. Councilor Parker, yes, I sometimes worry about him going off the rails, but he was right on tonight. Councilor Bajoran, just an outlandish thought from my over-analytical side. Was this whole board appointment process meant to make us look like we were making it political, as Sean said? It seemed like he already knew where it was going, or where it would go, almost as if he knew there were those other two people would get shot down before bringing the recommendation forward. If I'm wrong, tell me I'm full of it, and that ends the one thread. So that thread is what brought this forward. So we've had some conversation with our city attorney in terms of next steps, since that's why we're here tonight to make sure that, or I guess, reaffirm that vote as was laid out. Joe and Scott, am I leaving anything out necessarily?
Just to explain the process, so from meetings law, and a serial meeting would be that. I wanted to be clear. Then what that does is this happens to affect the public. As reinstated is a decision-making of the city. It's not necessarily a slam dunk, because that, if it were in front of a judge, they could choose to rule equitably whatever that judge determines that to be, but I think it makes a stronger argument for the city.
Okay. So as I read that, to me, it reads as does this meet the criteria for a serial meeting?
I didn't make, and I intentionally don't make that determination because I'm not a court, but what I will say is on its face, it appears as if, it even mentions a fifth person because it mentions that somebody tried to reach out to even Sean. So it appears as if people have reached out, and the idea of a serial meeting is that in the course of being outside public meeting, you have a deliberation towards a decision of a quorum, which in our case would be 4 or more people, and that decision, the deliberation should always be in the sunlight. They should always be in an open public meeting. So I always warn everybody, right? Like, don't have a quorum of you meeting at the bar, because if you talk city business, you've created a meeting. Well, you can also create a meeting in a serial way if 3 of you meet at the bar, and then one of those people go on and talk to a fourth one about what you talked about. And so it's kind of this dangerous idea of, you can, in a serial way, if these 2 talk and then they talk to another one and then they add another person on and then they kind of check back with the others, that's what it looks like. Potentially, I just suggest let's avail ourselves of this particular statute to protect our decision making.
Does this, well then, how does that then impact the liability to the city?
Well, there's liability of the city in a couple of different ways. Of course, a lawsuit is something you want to avoid. There's embarrassment. There's also all of that decision-making that hopefully isn't undone eventually, that this puts us on safer ground. But there's also ethical concerns that could be either against the city at large or individual counselors through the Ethics Commission.
Okay. So reaffirming it does eliminate liability for the city.
It helps.
For the council. It helps. And for the council.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, and it also is the right thing to do, right? It's more transparent, and it brings us back into the public meeting umbrella that we're supposed to operate under.
Okay. So if new information is found, confirming further that there was a serial meeting, does this further make us liable? Does this reopen the situation, or does this pretty much put an end to?
Well, the statute that I wrote is if a decision made by this is found to be in violation of the public meetings law. So this, in a sense, safeguards this particular decision, which was involving 3 planning commissioners. I can't answer if there were other serial meetings, it would ask me to speculate. But if there's other serial meetings about other decisions, we'd have to do the same thing if it was desired by a plurality. Because, part of this is we're dealing with a whole board of voting members. And so over half have to decide whether or not they want to go the route of availing themselves or not. So.
Okay. I guess my final question then, so would it be a conflict of interest for those in question with potential liability of violating meetings laws to vote to reaffirm this motion or this appointment?
Well, a revote would reinstate the decision back to the initial adoption date. It's a political calculation, and I try to give mostly legal advice.
Sure.
So my legal advice is to follow the statute. Political advice has different calculus, if that.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question on that.
Thanks.
Finish.
Um,
I do want to speak to that.
Okay, I'm asking these questions because we're lighting this and I want to make sure that we're doing right here, right? So, because it seems that if this, so if it's reaffirmed, it still could then be either litigated, I don't know if that's the right phrase on this one, or taken to the Ethics Commission in regards to this. And so therefore then, does that then come across as them voting for it, protecting them from potential fees or fines or what penalties as a gain aspect?
The statute is different for taking it to the Ethics Commission. Okay. This particular statute involves just trying to reaffirm and reinstate the decision back to its original adoption date. The ethics statute is different, and this doesn't protect or it doesn't change any sort of liability under that statute.
Okay.
But it might, I guess it could be used as argumentation that it was tried to be made right, because the Ethics Commission looks at whether or not you've taken steps to redress your behavior.
Okay. So there's the whole piece of getting tangled in courts. So so the whole piece of that then is, again, showing the intent of correcting the situation. And by taking that step to show at least the intent of correcting it, I guess protects the council.
Yeah, well, I guess my advice is just if you re-vote after following public meetings law, you at least avail yourself of 192-680 sub 1, which should effectively reinstate the decision back to its original date, notwithstanding potentially other actions that haven't been taken place but might or might not.
Okay.
I'm not sure that, I think.
Fantastic planning commissioner. So the fact that he put my name as who referred him doesn't mean that I actually referred him. Anybody can put whatever they want to on an application. Lastly, the fact that people would think that I'm smart enough to come up with some thing like that is kind of an honor, but also not true. I can't do that. I did, by the way, as a citizen of Canby and not in my role as city councilor. The Freedom of Information Act is a federal law that requires the disclosure of information and documents held by a government agency upon request. It was meant to make an agency's function more transparent so the public may more easily identify problems in government and pressure its officials to address them. At that meeting, Councilor Bain classified this federal law as a distraction from city business, a shameful display of political tit-for-tat, and being beneath the dignity of a city councilor. He also made a point that the public should know that this is going on, and I do completely agree. Councilor Parker described that federal law as the lost ability to function, as well as communication issues. And when asked for comment by the local news outlet, Councilor Spoon characterized it as a temper tantrum for a vote that didn't go a certain way. In reality, it is none of the above. I responded at that meeting stating that aside from my role on council, I'm still a taxpaying citizen of Canby, represented by all who sit on this dais, and that I had lost trust in some of my elected officials. So yes, I filed the request, again, as a citizen of Canby, to try and clear up that trust issue. But here we are, 1 month later, with evidence before us that 4 of our city councilors may have violated public meeting laws. Unfortunately, it was decided that the information that was brought to light shouldn't be included in our council packet to be available to the public in fear that we might incriminate ourselves. But instead, we should just do a revote to basically cover our asses. And while that's an option available to us, I'd like to say that it is my belief that to vote the same way at the meeting in question, just to fix a mistake, would be a violation of your integrity, and I hope nobody would do that to the citizens of Canby. I'm disappointed in our attorney and our city manager for putting us in an even more precarious position when this information is released to the public, which it has been tonight. And the public feels that we covered up a mistake. Councilor Parker has stated before, as a matter of fact, as part of his campaign, the ABCs of city councilor, accountability, beautification, and communication, or something to that effect. And so in an effort to stay accountable and transparent to the citizens, I believe that it's important that they heard the information that came to light. And so thank you, Mr. Mayor, for reading that information into the public record. With that, I will not be in support of any revote this evening.
Okay. Then, Councilor Banks, go ahead. Okay. Then, Councilor Banks, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve the appointment of Judy Jaroche to the Planning Commission for a term that will expire December 31st, 2024. The appointment of Chris Calkins to the Planning Commission for a term that will expire on December 31st, 2024, and the appointment of Dan Ewert to the Planning Commission for a term that will expire on December 31st, 2022.
Rules-ish necessarily your proceedings because they're supposed to be guidelines, but the reality is either this second before the motion or before the vote on the motion.
It's on it.
So,
reserve chairperson because the two individuals had resigned before we had the problem started. It started when the city charter was not followed for any of these interviews of anybody because there was no.
That's the way everything went. As far this is totally political, and I can't believe these four counselors here are willing to risk.
I tried to address that issue at the time, but it became clear that that would be a moot point since we didn't have enough folks on the commission to vote for a chair. I have some questions and some comments, so I guess I'll start with my and time.
And that I think that there's support at council to accomplish some of them. That's not the same as what I just got accused of. So I just want to, and Mayor Hodson, I think it's part of your role to make sure there's decorum. I would advise maybe we don't accuse each other of things that aren't even the topic of conversation.
Okay. I know that there's a motion on the table, and I think that there's got to be a way to work our way through this, and I think in the discussion was tolling advisory committee to ODOT and to.
But so I guess for budgetary reasons, it was pulled out of the First Avenue project, and then it was discussed as maybe going in with the arch. This was prior to my time, but that was pulled out of that project as well. If it was the council's, more information on that. And then the last piece.
All those roads up to speed in 1 year with jumping ahead of what is to come as far as no change is slowly getting eroded. And the problem that this plan was created to fix is now becoming a problem.